They say your first vacation should change your life. Hers did, just not the way she expected. 1 year later, the white room was sterile, almost surgical in its emptiness. Zara Bennett sat with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone pale against her dark skin. Exhaustion lived in the shadows under her eyes, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. When did you realize Kang Ji-hoon had been planning to take you from the moment you booked your flight to Seoul? The question came from across the table, not from a detective, but from her therapist, Dr. Kim, who'd been helping her process everything for the past year. Zara's shoulders dropped. I didn't. Not until it was too late to matter. Did you know he'd killed 17 men before you met him? A pause. Heavy. Weighted with a year's worth of reflection. I knew what he was. I didn't know what he'd become. Dr. Kim slid a photograph across the table. Not evidence, but a memory prompt they'd been working toward for months. Zara's breath caught. The image showed her and Ji-hoon on their rooftop garden, his arms around her waist, both of them laughing at something beyond the frame. Tell me about the beginning, Dr. Kim said gently. Tell me about the vacation. Zara's eyes grew distant, seeing past the therapy room to a sunset in Seoul 14 months ago. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. It was supposed to be perfect. Before we dive deeper into Zara's story, if you love dark romance with twists you won't see coming, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You do not want to miss how this ends. Drop a black heart in the comments if you're already hooked, and let me know. Would you go back for someone who manipulated you? Let's find out what Zara did. Now, back to Seoul. 15 years. That's how long Zara had been everyone's lifeline, everyone's foundation, everyone's solution to every crisis. Detroit winters had a way of hardening a person, turning soft edges into sharp corners, transforming hope into survival instinct. She'd been 17 when the semi-truck ran the red light, 17 when the police knocked on her door at 2 in the morning, 17 when she became the legal guardian of 3 children who still believed the world was good. Her younger siblings had been 12, 9, and 6. Old enough to understand their parents were gone, young enough to need someone to tuck them in at night, to sign permission slips, to make sure there was always food in the refrigerator even when the paychecks didn't stretch far enough. The hospital where Zara worked as an emergency room nurse knew her as the woman who never called in sick, who picked up extra shifts without complaint, who could stitch a gunshot wound with steady hands even after a 16-hour day. What they didn't know was that she microwaved instant noodles at 2 in the morning while studying for her nursing certifications, that she hadn't bought new clothes for herself in 3 years, that she couldn't remember the last time someone had asked how she was doing and actually waited for an answer. At 32 years old, Zara Bennett had forgotten what it felt like to live for herself. Her best friend Maya had practically forged the time-off request. 2 weeks in Seoul, she'd said, blocking the break room door so Zara couldn't escape. You need this. You need this. When's the last time you did something just for you? Zara hadn't had an answer. So she'd gone, booked the flight, found a small vacation rental in a neighborhood she could barely pronounce, and told herself that for 14 days, she would be nobody's caretaker, nobody's solution, nobody's anchor. Just Zara. Just herself. Seoul had been everything she'd dreamed. The energy of the city wrapped around her like a warm blanket, so different from Detroit's harsh edges. Street vendors called out in melodic Korean, the smell of tteokbokki and hotteok mixing with exhaust fumes and cherry blossoms. For the first time in 15 years, Zara felt like she could breathe without counting the cost of every breath. Day 3 found her in Bukshin Hanok village at golden hour, camera in hand, trying to capture the way traditional Hanok roofs looked against the modern skyline in the distance. The sunset painted everything in shades of amber and rose, and for a moment, just one perfect moment, Zara felt free. Then she saw it. The alley was narrow, shadowed, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. 2 men stood facing each other, their body language tense, aggressive. A briefcase changed hands. Words were exchanged in rapid Korean, too fast for Zara's limited understanding. Then one man said something sharp, final, and the other's hand moved faster than thought. The knife slid between ribs with terrible efficiency. A muffled gasp. The metallic sound of the briefcase hitting concrete. The body crumpling like a puppet with cut strings. Zara's camera slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers. It clattered against the stone pathway, the sound impossibly loud in the settling silence. Both men's heads snapped toward her. Their eyes locked onto hers, and Zara's entire body went cold with primal terror. Move! Her mind screamed. Run! She ran. Footsteps pounded behind her, getting closer. Her nursing shoes weren't made for sprinting, and the cobblestone streets seemed designed to trip her. She turned a corner, lungs burning, and slammed chest first into an immovable wall of muscle and expensive fabric. A hand clamped over her mouth before she could scream. Another arm locked around her waist, lifting her slightly off her feet with effortless strength. She thrashed, trying to remember the self-defense training from nursing school, but the grip was iron. Don't scream. The voice was male, low, and spoke English with barely a trace of accent. Don't run. You're not safe. Everything went black. When consciousness returned, Zara's first thought was that she'd died and somehow ended up in a luxury hotel commercial. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Seoul's glittering nightscape. Modern furniture in shades of cream and black filled a space that looked like it cost more per month than she made in a year. Recessed lighting cast everything in a soft, expensive glow. Her second thought was that the door was locked. She tried it 3 times, yanking on the handle with increasing desperation, before she heard the lock click from the outside. The door opened, and a man stepped through. He was tall, maybe 6'1", wearing a suit that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. Sharp features, dark eyes that gave nothing away, and a presence that seemed to pull all the air from the room. This was someone used to being obeyed without question. You're awake, he said in that same perfect English. Good. Zara's hands balled into fists at her sides. Where am I? Who are you? You can't just. You witnessed a territorial execution, he interrupted, his tone clinical, as if he were discussing the weather. 3 rival families now know your face. If I release you, you'll be dead within 48 hours. So you'll stay here, under my protection, until I neutralize the threat. Protection? The word came out strangled with fury and disbelief. You kidnapped me. I saved your life. He adjusted his cufflinks with a casual gesture that somehow made the statement even more infuriating. There's a difference. Zara stepped forward, all 5'6" of her vibrating with rage. 15 years of being responsible, of swallowing her anger, of making herself small to make everyone else comfortable. It all crystallized into this moment. I survived 15 years raising 3 kids in Detroit on a nurse's salary, she said, her voice low and dangerous. I've stitched gunshot wounds at 3 in the morning. I've talked down addicts going through withdrawal. I've held dying patients' hands while their families said goodbye. You think locked doors and pretty views scare me? For the first time, something flickered across his expressionless face. Not quite a smile, but close. He studied her with new interest, the way someone might examine an unexpected puzzle piece. No, he said softly. That's the problem. He turned toward the door, and panic clawed at Zara's throat. Wait, what's your name? He paused, one hand on the doorframe. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Kong Ji-hoon, he said finally. But you won't need it long. The door closed with a quiet click. The lock engaged. Zara stood alone in her gilded cage, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. But who was Kong Ji-hoon? To understand that, you'd have to go back 29 years, to a garden where cherry blossoms fell like snow onto blood-soaked ground. The boy had been 9 years old enough to understand what was happening, young enough that the memory would scar in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. His father, already feared, already powerful, stood over a man's broken body, pipe in hand, teaching a lesson about what happened to those who stole from the Kong family. Watch, his father had commanded. This is what strength looks like. The boy watched. The cherry blossoms kept falling. His mother found him afterward, still standing in the same spot, blood pooling toward his small shoes. She'd pulled him close, her silk hanbok whispering against his cheek, and said in rapid Korean, "If you want to survive this family, never love anything they can take from you." Young Ji-hoon had buried his face in her dress and said nothing. But he remembered. He always remembered. Back in the white interrogation room, the interrogator's voice cut through Zara's memory. So he kidnapped you. Why didn't you escape? Zara's eyes refocused on the present, on the zip ties cutting into her wrists, on the harsh fluorescent light that made everything feel unreal. I tried, she said. His man, Min Suk, was watching every exit. Former special forces, I think. He was always there, always watching. But that's not why I stayed. Then why? Zara's voice softened, and something that might have been longing crossed her face. Because on day 5, he brought me jollof rice. Said he noticed I hadn't eaten anything Korean yet, that I looked sad. He'd found a West African restaurant on the other side of the city. Do you understand? A mafia boss who noticed I was homesick. Silence stretched between interrogator and subject. That's when I realized, Zara continued, her words barely above a whisper. He wasn't just keeping me prisoner. He was watching me. Really watching. Seeing me in a way I hadn't been seen in years. And that didn't frighten you? It should have. Day 5 in the penthouse had indeed brought unexpected changes. Ji-hoon had assigned Min Suk, a stone-faced man with military precision and eyes that tracked everything, as Zara's official shadow. He'll keep you safe, Ji-hoon had said. He'll anticipate your needs. But Ji-hoon himself kept appearing. He'd show up at odd hours, claiming to check security protocols, but his eyes would linger on Zara as she sketched Seoul's skyline from the windows. He brought food from restaurants she'd mentioned wanting to try, even though she'd only mentioned them to herself. He noticed when she was cold and adjusted the temperature without being asked. On day 6, Zara discovered his library while Min Suk was changing shifts. 3 walls of books in Korean, English, French, and Japanese. Philosophy, poetry, classic literature. She pulled down a worn copy of Toni Morrison's Beloved and found the margins filled with notes in both Korean and English. One passage was heavily underlined. We accept the love we think we deserve. In the margin, in sharp handwriting, Ji-hoon had written, Then I deserve nothing. Zara traced the words with her finger, something aching in her chest. Interesting choice, Ji-hoon's voice said from the doorway. She jumped, nearly dropping the book. I didn't mean to snoop. I just... Keep it, he interrupted. If you want. He left before she could respond, but something had shifted. The walls between captor and captive were developing cracks. Day 7. He taught her how to disappear in a crowd. In case, he said, though he didn't specify in case of what. They went to Myeongdong during peak shopping hours, and he showed her how to change her gait, how to use reflections to track followers, how to blend into the flow of foot traffic. His hands lingered when he adjusted her hood. She felt his breath on her neck when he leaned in to point out a security camera. Neither of them acknowledged the electricity that crackled in the space between their bodies. Why are you really keeping me here? She asked as they walked back to his car, her voice nearly lost in the crowd noise. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because you're mine to protect. Not, I'm protecting you. Mine. Zara stopped walking. That's not the same thing. Ji-hoon turned to face her, and for the first time since they'd met, his expression was unguarded. Raw, almost desperate. I know. On day 8, the pretense finally crumbled. Zara had been drawing at the window when she noticed the scar along Ji-hoon's ribs, visible through his half-buttoned shirt as he reached for a book on a high shelf. A long, vicious mark that looked like it should have killed him. What happened? The question was out before she could stop herself. Ji-hoon's hand dropped to his side. For a moment, she thought he'd leave without answering, the way he always did when conversations turned personal. Instead, he moved closer, until only inches separated them. My father's test, he said quietly. When I was 16, survive a knife fight or die trying. Zara's nursing instincts took over. She reached out without thinking, her fingers tracing the raised tissue. It's a miracle it didn't hit anything vital. It did. I died for 43 seconds. Her hand stilled. Ji-hoon. He caught her wrist, but gently, his thumb pressed against her racing pulse. Don't touch what you can't handle. Zara lifted her chin, meeting his dark eyes with her own steady gaze. Who says I can't? The air between them went thick, charged with everything they weren't saying. His grip on her wrist tightened fractionally, and she felt his control wavering like a candle flame in wind. Then his phone buzzed. The spell broke. He released her wrist and stepped back, his expression shuddering closed again. I have a meeting, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Min Suk will bring dinner. He was gone before she could catch her breath. But Ji-hoon's ability to walk away, to maintain emotional distance, had been learned at great cost. To understand that, you'd have to know about Lee Yuna. Ji-hoon had been 21, a university student, trying to pretend his last name didn't carry the weight of blood and money. Yuna had been a literature major with a laugh like wind chimes and dreams of teaching English in small villages. She'd made him feel almost normal, almost clean. For 6 months, they'd hidden their relationship. They'd meet at small coffee shops far from campus, where no one knew the Kong family name. She'd rest her head on his shoulder while they studied, and he'd felt something dangerous bloom in his chest, hope. His father had found out, of course. The head of a criminal empire didn't stay powerful by being unobservant. The memory still tasted like ash in Ji-hoon's mouth. His father's office. Yuna kneeling on the floor, tears streaming down her face. The marriage contract with the Park family's youngest son already signed. She'll be a peace offering, his father had said, smoking a cigarette with casual cruelty. The Parks get a bride, we get territory rights in Busan. Everyone wins. Please, Ji-hoon had begged, the last time he'd ever begged for anything. Please don't do this. His father had smiled. This is what caring costs, son. Best you learn it now. Yuna had left for her new life without saying goodbye. Ji-hoon had stood at his window and watched her car disappear, and something in him had frozen solid. He'd built walls from the rubble of that moment, walls that had held firm for 13 years, until a woman from Detroit had thrown a vase at his head and told him she wasn't afraid. Day 9 brought unexpected violence, an equally unexpected revelation. Ji-hoon had told Zara she would accompany him to a business meeting. Stay silent, he'd instructed. Watch, learn, but don't speak. The meeting was at a private gambling house in Gangnam, all red velvet and crystal chandeliers, and men who looked like they'd kill you for looking at them wrong. Ji-hoon was negotiating with the Russian Bratva over shipping routes, his Korean-accented Russian apparently fluent enough to handle complex negotiations. Zara sat in the corner as instructed, trying to be invisible, but she was a trauma nurse, trained to read body language, to spot the signs of someone spiraling toward violence. The youngest Russian, maybe 25, with prison tattoos crawling up his neck, was showing classic panic attack symptoms. Rapid breathing, dilated pupils, trembling hands moving toward his concealed weapon. The conversation was deteriorating fast, and no one else seemed to notice he was about to snap. When he pulled the gun, Zara moved without thinking. She stood slowly, hands visible, and walked toward him with the same calm she used with violent patients in the ER. Every man in the room went tense, hands moving toward weapons, but she kept her eyes locked on the young Russian. Hey, she said softly in English, gambling that he'd understand. Look at me. You're having a panic attack. I'm a nurse. I need you to breathe with me. In for 4 counts. Yes, just like that. Now hold it. Good. Now out for 4. She kept talking, kept breathing with him, kept her voice steady and calm. His hand slowly lowered. The gun dropped. He sank into a chair, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. The room exhaled collectively. The lead Russian negotiator laughed, a booming sound that made the crystals chime. Your woman has steel, Kong. I like her. We have a deal. In the car afterward, Ji-hoon was silent for so long that Zara thought he might be angry. Then he said, You should have stayed quiet. But I didn't. And you liked it. His jaw tightened. The muscle there jumped. He didn't deny it. That night, Zara woke to sounds from Ji-hoon's room. Thrashing, murmuring in rapid Korean. A nightmare that had him in its grip. She hesitated at her door, knowing Min Suk should stop her, but the guard's post was empty. Bathroom break, maybe. She opened Ji-hoon's door. He was tangled in silk sheets, his face contorted with whatever horrors played behind his closed eyes. Scars crisscrossed his torso, a roadmap of violence survived. He was murmuring something over and over, and Zara caught one word she recognized. Yama. Mother. Ji-hoon, she said softly, sitting on the edge of his bed. Ji-hoon, wake up. His eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused. For a heartbeat, she thought he might attack her. Then recognition dawned, and something in him crumbled. He pulled her down with desperate strength, his face buried against her stomach, his whole body shaking with silent sobs. She held him, one hand stroking his hair, and felt the walls he'd built come crashing down. I see them, he whispered into the darkness. Everyone I've killed. They visit me every night. I know, she said, because what else could she say? You should hate me. I should. Why don't you? Zara's hand stilled in his hair. She thought about 15 years of being strong, of being the one everyone leaned on, of forgetting what it felt like to be held. She thought about this broken man who'd noticed she was homesick, who'd brought her jollof rice, who watched her like she was something precious he was afraid to touch. Because you're not just the monster everyone fears, she said finally. You're also the man who's never been held. They stayed like that until Dawn painted the windows pink and gold. Back in the interrogation room, the interrogator's voice was gentler now, almost sympathetic. When did the relationship become physical? Zara's eyes were distant, seeing another time, another room. Day 12. After I learned the truth. That he'd orchestrated your witness testimony? That you were always bait? Yes. The word was barely audible. And you forgave him anyway? A single tear tracked down Zara's cheek. I forgave him anyway. Does that make me crazy? Does it? Before Zara could answer that question, before she could examine the twisted psychology of loving your captor, Day 11 arrived with violence and blood. She was sketching in a cafe 3 blocks from the penthouse. Min-suk at the next table pretending to read a newspaper. Ji-hoon had slowly been giving her more freedom, trusting her not to run. Or maybe hoping she wouldn't want to. The van came out of nowhere. For Min, military-grade efficiency, had her zip-tied and inside before Min-suk could reach his weapon. She saw him take a bullet to the shoulder as the van doors slammed shut. Then they were moving, and Zara's ER training kicked in. Assess. Adapt. Survive. The warehouse they took her to was industrial, abandoned, perfect for making someone disappear. The Choi family. She recognized the tattoos from surveillance photos Ji-hoon had shown her, clearly wanted to draw him out into a trap. They zip-tied her to a chair. The youngest guard, barely 19 with soft eyes that didn't match his hard expression, was assigned to watch her. The others left to prepare for Ji-hoon's inevitable arrival. First time doing this? Zara asked him calmly, channeling every hour she'd spent de-escalating violent situations in the ER. He startled, then nodded. Me too, she said. Want to talk about it? For the next hour, she talked to him. About his family, about the path that had led him here, about whether this was really who he wanted to be. She wasn't trying to escape. She knew Ji-hoon would come. She was trying to save the boy's soul before it was too late. When the doors exploded inward, Zara's captor was crying silently, confessing that he'd gotten into this life to pay for his sister's medical bills. Ji-hoon stood in the doorway, alone, facing 30 armed men. Let her go, he said quietly. This is between us. What happened next would haunt Zara's dreams for years. Ji-hoon moved like violence made flesh, like death given human form. He fought with the terrible efficiency of someone who'd been trained since childhood to kill. But even in the midst of carnage, his eyes kept finding her, checking that she was unharmed, protecting her even while destroying everyone around them. The young guard died in the crossfire, and Zara would never stop wondering if she could have saved him. When it was over, Ji-hoon carried her out. His hands were gentle despite the blood coating them. He was murmuring in Korean and English, words tumbling over each other. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, my Annie. I'm sorry. Back at the penthouse, he tried to leave her alone. His hands were shaking, blood drying on his clothes, violence still crackling around him like static electricity. Zara grabbed his hand. Stay. I'm covered in. I don't care. Stay. They ended up on the bathroom floor. She cleaned his wounds with steady hands, cataloging each injury with clinical precision even as her heart broke. When she'd bandaged the worst of them, she kissed his split knuckles, then his bruised jaw, then, finally, his mouth. He tasted like copper and desperation. You don't want this, he said against her lips, even as his hands clutched at her waist. You want to feel safe. I've never felt safe, she countered, pulling him closer. I want you. They didn't have sex, not yet, not tonight. But they slept tangled together, her head on his chest, his arms wrapped around her like a fortress, and for the first time in 20 years, Ji-hoon slept without nightmares. They had one perfect day. Day 12 dawned bright and clear, and Ji-hoon took her to Namsan Tower, to the palace gardens, to tiny restaurants where no one knew his name. They held hands like normal people. She laughed at his dry humor. He bought her a ridiculous stuffed animal from a street vendor just to see her smile. For one perfect day, they pretended they were just a man and a woman falling in love. Then Zara found the tablet. Min-suk had left it on the coffee table, unlocked, an oversight that seemed impossible for someone so careful. Later, she'd wonder if he'd done it on purpose, if he'd known what needed to happen. Flight manifests. Surveillance photos of her in Detroit, at the hospital, at her apartment, at her siblings' school. Detailed dossiers on her family, her finances, her routines. Her vacation rental listed with annotations. Direct line of sight to Choi money laundering operation. The world tilted sideways. Her random vacation. The chance witness to a murder. The protection she'd needed. None of it had been chance. All of it had been orchestrated. She was always the plan. Ji-hoon walked in to find her holding the tablet, tears streaming down her face. Was any of it real? She asked, her voice breaking. He could have lied. The old Ji-hoon would have lied. But something had changed in him, something she'd cracked open that couldn't be closed again. It started as strategy, he said, his voice rough with emotion he could no longer hide. You became everything. That's not good enough. I know. The words exploded from him, all his careful control shattering. I know I'm a monster. I know I manipulated you. But when I thought you were dead in that warehouse, I stopped breathing. So tell me, how do I undo that? How do I separate what I planned from what I feel? Zara stood, her whole body shaking. You can't. She walked out, made it to the elevator. Min-suk didn't stop her, another gift, another impossibility. She walked straight to the U.S. Embassy, requested emergency services, and was given 48 hours to get her affairs in order before her emergency evacuation flight. She didn't look back. Couldn't look back. While Zara was packing in the embassy's temporary housing, staring at a sketch she'd made of Ji-hoon sleeping. The only time he looked peaceful, Ji-hoon was in his father's office, bleeding from a cut above his eye and refusing to kneel. Kill her, Kang Dae-young said, his voice cold. Or step down as heir. You don't get both. Ji-hoon had spent his entire life preparing for this moment, preparing to take over the family empire. Everything he'd suffered, everything he'd become, had been for this. I choose her, he said. His father's face went purple with rage. She makes you weak. She makes me human. There's a difference. The coup attempt started that night. Half the family backed the father, believing strength meant ruthlessness. The other half backed Ji-hoon, believing the old ways were bleeding them dry. The Kang estate became a war zone. Ji-hoon barely escaped with his life. Min-suk took 2 bullets getting him out. They went to ground in a safe house, and Ji-hoon began liquidating assets, calling in favors, arranging protection for Zara from every syndicate in East Asia. He was buying her safety with everything he had. In Detroit, Zara lasted 3 days. Her siblings were thrilled to have her home. Her hospital welcomed her back with open arms. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, which was exactly the problem. She'd changed. Seoul had changed her. He had changed her. On day 17, Min-suk arrived on her doorstep, bleeding from a poorly bandaged shoulder wound and carrying a hard drive. He told me not to come, Min-suk said in heavily accented English. Said you'd made your choice, and he'd respect it. But you should know what he gave up for you. The drive contained everything. Bank transfers showing Ji-hoon liquidating his personal fortune. Video of his confrontation with his father. Audio recordings of him negotiating her safety with families that wanted her dead. And one final video, timestamped from 2 hours ago. Ji-hoon looked into the camera, and Zara had never seen him look so tired. So human. I don't ask you to forgive me, he said quietly. I don't deserve forgiveness. I ask you to live. To be happy. To have the freedom I took from you. You were the only real thing I ever had, Zara. The only choice that was ever really mine. I hope that means something, even if it's not enough. The video ended. Zara booked a flight that night. Day 20. Changdeokgung Palace. The secret garden closed to tourists for a private meeting. Representatives from 5 families gathered in a traditional hanok structure, and in the center sat Kang Ji-hoon, negotiating the terms of his own execution in exchange for guaranteed safety for one American nurse who'd witnessed too much. His father was notably absent, killed in the coup attempt by his own second-in-command. The new order was still forming, still fragile. Ji-hoon had no cards left to play. The woman is a liability, the Choi representative said. She's seen too much. She knows nothing that matters, Ji-hoon countered. And she's protected by treaties I've arranged with organizations you don't want to anger. Kill her, and you start wars you can't win. Bold words for a man with no army. I don't need an army. I need you to be smart. The doors opened. Everyone turned. Zara walked in, and the room went silent. She was terrified. Her hands were shaking, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. But she kept her spine straight and her head high. She'd worn traditional Korean hanbok, dark blue silk that Min-suk had somehow procured. Respect, he'd said. Show them respect. I'm Zara Bennett, she said in carefully practiced Korean. I'm the witness. And I have recordings of every family's operations for the past month. It was mostly a bluff. She had some recordings. Min Suk had given her his personal insurance files, but not everything. The trick was making them believe she had more. I'm offering a treaty, she continued, switching to English for the complex terms. Mutual non-aggression. Ji-hoon released from all family obligations. My silence guaranteed. I don't care about your business. I care about one man. Give me that, and you'll never hear from me again. The Choi representative laughed. You think we'll honor this? You think a treaty with a woman means anything? Ji-hoon started to stand, violence in every line of his body, but Zara caught his eye and shook her head slightly. Let me. I think you'll honor it because I'm nobody, she said calmly. I'm not part of your world, but I know people who are. Journalists, federal agents, Interpol liaisons. I've made arrangements. If anything happens to me or to Ji-hoon, everything gets released. Not just to Korean authorities, to international ones. Your operations, your money laundering routes, your political connections. All of it. She pulled out a phone, pressed a button. This is a dead man's switch. I press it once a day. If I don't, files upload automatically. You can kill me, but you can't stop what happens after. Silence stretched like pulled wire. The vote was split. Arguments broke out in rapid Korean. Alliances shifted like smoke. In the chaos, the Choi representative made his move, pulling a weapon, clearly preferring to eliminate both problems at once. Min Suk and Ji-hoon moved simultaneously. The guard dove in front of Zara, taking the bullet meant for her. Ji-hoon disarmed Choi with brutal efficiency, and the room erupted into violence. When it settled, Choi was dead, killed by his own lieutenant who'd grown tired of his instability. The new Choi representative, younger and smarter, looked at Zara with grudging respect. Your treaty is accepted, she said. But understand, this is a one-time offer. No second chances. I understand, Zara said. She finally looked at Ji-hoon. He was staring at her like he couldn't quite believe she was real. You came back, he said, his voice raw. I came back, she confirmed. Why? She crossed the room, her hanbok whispering against the floor. She took his bloodied hands in hers. Because you gave me back my agency by letting me walk away. And I gave it back to you by choosing to return. We're even now. Are we? No, she admitted. We probably never will be. But I'd rather be uneven with you than balanced with anyone else. He pulled her close, and for the first time since she'd known him, Kang Ji-hoon cried in front of other people. He buried his face in her hair and shook with the weight of everything he'd almost lost. The white room came back into focus. The interrogator, patient, quiet, waited for Zara to continue. That wasn't an interrogation room, was it? She said. No, Miss Bennett. You've been in therapy for the past year. This is our final session. The camera pulled back. The white room was revealed to be a therapist's office. The zip ties, just her own clasped hands, white-knuckled with the effort of reliving her trauma. Her therapist leaned forward. And how do you feel about your choices now? Zara looked at her left hand. A simple band of black titanium caught the light. I feel like I finally chose myself, she said slowly. And he happened to be part of that choice. Even though the relationship started with manipulation, with kidnapping. He gave me back my agency by letting me walk away. I gave it back to him by choosing to return. Does it make it right? No. Does it make it ours? Yes. Do you think you'll ever feel completely safe with him? Zara paused, considering. Safety was never the point. Freedom was. And I'm freer with him than I ever was alone. I spent 15 years being everyone's caretaker, everyone's solution. With him, I get to just be Zara. Messy, complicated, imperfect Zara. That's worth more than safety. Even knowing what he's done, what he's capable of, especially knowing. I don't love him despite his darkness. I love him including it. All of it. And he loves me the same way. Nursing trauma, control issues, savior complex and all. The therapist smiled. I think that's a good place to stop. You've come a long way, Zara. Outside the office, Ji-hoon waited in the car. He always drove her himself now, unwilling to delegate her safety to anyone else. The empire was smaller, more legitimate. Security consulting, he called it. Zara ran her clinic in Itaewon, treating the marginalized populations that reminded her of her Detroit patients. They drove to their rooftop garden, the one they'd claimed together, filled with plants from both Korea and Detroit, a bridge between their worlds. Seoul glittered below, lights stretching to the horizon. "How was it?" he asked, taking her hand. "Hard. Good." He kissed her knuckles, lingering over the wedding band. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Zara looked out over the city that had given her everything and taken everything and somehow left her with exactly what she needed. "Loving you? Never. What you did to get us here. Sometimes. But I'd make the same choice again, even knowing where we'd end up. Especially knowing." They stood in silence, two people who'd found each other in the worst way possible and chose each other anyway. A sketch fell from Zara's bag, one of many she'd made. This one of Ji-hoon sleeping, the only time he looked at peace. In the margin, in Korean characters he'd taught her to write, she'd inscribed, "The only real thing I ever had." Because some loves aren't built on foundation stones of trust and honesty. Some loves are forged in fire, in trauma, in the terrible clarity that comes from staring into someone's darkness and choosing not to look away. Those loves don't look like fairy tales. They look like survival. They look like choice. They look like two people saying, "I see what you are, I see what I am, and I choose this anyway." And maybe that's the most honest kind of love there is. So what can we learn from Zara and Ji-hoon's impossible story? Perhaps that healing isn't linear, that love doesn't always look the way we're told it should, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose ourselves, even when choosing ourselves means choosing someone the world says we shouldn't. Zara spent 15 years being what everyone needed. In Seoul, she learned to need something for herself, even when that something was complicated and dark and beautiful all at once. Real love, the kind that lasts, isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose brokenness fits with yours, whose darkness you can hold without flinching, who sees every ugly part of you and stays anyway. It's about agency and choice, about walking away and choosing to return, about building something new from the wreckage of everything that came before. Thank you for staying with Zara and Ji-hoon's journey. Their story reminds us that we all deserve the freedom to choose our own path, even when that path leads somewhere unexpected. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about finding our other half. They're about finding someone who helps us become whole on our own terms. If this story moved you, remember, you too deserve to be chosen, to be seen, to be loved with your darkness included. Now go forth and choose yourself, whatever that looks like for you.